Mother Bear refused to leave this home on fire. The reason? An alone child inside. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. Night had fallen over Pine Creek Valley, bringing with it a blanket of silence that wrapped around the scattered cabins nestled among the ancient trees. The Harrison family's small wooden home stood at the edge of the forest, its windows dark except for one, the soft glow from 5-year-old Emma's nightlight as she slept peacefully, unaware that her parents had rushed to the hospital with her grandmother just an hour ago. No one noticed the first tendril of smoke curling from beneath the old kitchen stove. No one heard the quiet pop of aged wiring finally giving way. No one saw the tiny ember that landed on the frayed kitchen rug, slowly growing from orange speck to hungry flame. In the nearby woods, a large brown bear named Luna by local rangers moved quietly through the underbrush with her young cub. She paused, lifting her nose to the wind, catching a scent that made her muscles tense. Smoke. Fire. Danger. Every instinct told her to turn away, to lead her cub deeper into the safety of the forest. But then she caught something else, something that made her hesitate. A human scent, small and sweet, mixed with the acrid smoke. Luna had encountered humans before, had learned to avoid their loud voices and strange contraptions. Yet something about this particular scent triggered an unfamiliar feeling deep within her, a feeling that pulled her toward the growing glow of orange light through the trees. The wind shifted, carrying a sound, faint but unmistakable. A child's cough. Luna's cub whimpered, tugging at her fur. The flames growing brighter through the trees promised only death. Every natural law commanded her to flee, but Luna couldn't move away. Instead, she took one hesitant step toward the burning cabin, then another, drawn by a force stronger than fear. No one would have expected what happened next. No one would have believed it possible. The kitchen was fully engulfed now, flames climbing the wooden walls with frightening speed. The heat shattered a window, allowing dark smoke to billow into the night sky. The noise finally penetrated Emma's dreams, pulling her from sleep with a frightened gasp. "Mommy!" she called, her small voice barely audible over the roaring flames. No answer came. Emma slipped from her bed, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. The doorknob burned her hand when she tried to open it, making her cry out in pain. Smoke poured beneath the door, filling her small lungs and making her cough violently. Outside, Luna circled the burning cabin, her powerful muscles coiled with tension. Her cub remained at the edge of the trees, crying softly for its mother to return. The heat scorched Luna's fur as she approached closer, her keen eyes searching desperately for something she couldn't name. A tiny movement caught her attention, a flash of pale skin and terrified eyes at a second-floor window. The child was trapped, with flames already climbing the stairs behind her. Emma pressed her face against the window, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks as she desperately pounded her small fists against the glass. Luna stood beneath the window, her massive frame illuminated by the dancing flames. She rose onto her hind legs, reaching nearly to the second story. Their eyes met, the terrified child and the wild mother bear, and something passed between them. A recognition, an understanding. Emma's bedroom door crashed inward as the fire breached her last sanctuary. The little girl screamed, backing toward the window, choking on the thick smoke that now filled her room. The heat was unbearable, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. And then Luna made her choice. With a powerful roar that echoed through the valley, she charged toward the burning porch. The wooden steps collapsed beneath her weight, but she pushed forward, ignoring the pain as embers landed on her thick fur. Instinct screamed at her to run, to save herself and her waiting cub. but something stronger than instinct drove her forward. The front door was already partially burned through. Luna slammed her massive body against it once, twice, 3 times, until it gave way in a shower of burning splinters. Fire greeted her, a wall of searing heat and light that no wild animal would willingly face. Yet Luna stepped inside. Smoke filled every corner of the house, making it nearly impossible to see. Luna's sensitive nose led her forward, following the scent of the child above. The staircase was already partially collapsed, flames eating away at the wooden steps. Luna hesitated only a moment before placing her weight on the first step, then the next. Wood cracked beneath her. Pain lanced through her paws as the hot surface burned her sensitive pads. Still, she climbed. Upstairs, Emma had crawled into the corner of her room, clutching her stuffed rabbit as flames consumed her bed. The window was too high, too difficult for her small arms to open. Each breath brought more smoke into her lungs. Her vision darkened at the edges. She thought of her parents, wishing they would come rescue her. She closed her eyes. That's when she heard it. A strange, huffing sound, followed by the crash of something large moving through the burning hall outside her room. Emma's eyes flew open as her door frame filled with an impossible sight. A massive brown bear, its fur singed in places, its dark eyes fixed directly on her. Emma was too frightened, too overwhelmed to scream. She pressed herself harder against the wall, certain this was the end. But Luna didn't charge. She didn't growl. Instead, she moved forward slowly, her movements deliberate and careful. When she reached Emma, she nudged the child gently with her nose. The ceiling creaked ominously above them. They had seconds, not minutes. Luna turned slightly, presenting her broad back to the child. Emma stared, uncomprehending, until Luna gently tugged at her nightgown with her teeth. Understanding bloomed through Emma's fear. With trembling hands, she reached out and grabbed handfuls of the bear's thick fur. Luna moved carefully, supporting the child's weight as Emma clung to her back. The journey back to the stairs was treacherous. The hallway floor now partially collapsed, revealing the inferno below. Luna stepped carefully, testing each board before committing her weight. The staircase was nearly gone. Luna paused at the top, the child whimpering against her back. There was no choice. With a powerful leap, Luna jumped over the worst of the burning steps, landing heavily on what remained of the lower portion. Wood cracked and gave way beneath her, but her powerful legs pushed forward, propelling them toward the open front door. Just as they reached the threshold, a massive beam crashed down behind them, sending a shower of embers into the night. Luna burst from the burning house, the child still clinging desperately to her back, both of them covered in soot and gasping for clean air. Luna moved away from the intense heat, carefully crouching to allow Emma to slide from her back onto the cool grass. The little girl collapsed, coughing violently, her nightgown singed and her hair matted with soot. But she was alive. In the distance, sirens wailed. Neighbors had seen the flames and called for help. Luna's cub called anxiously from the forest edge. The bear looked from her cub to the child, torn between two powerful instincts. Emma looked up at the massive creature that had saved her life, her eyes wide with wonder through her tears. She reached out one small, trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Headlights cut through the smoke-filled night as Emma's parents' car skidded to a stop at the end of their driveway. Sarah and Michael Harrison leaped from the vehicle, their faces masks of horror, as they took in the sight of their home consumed by flames. "Emma!" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. "Emma!" Then they saw her, a small figure sitting in the grass away from the burning house. But she wasn't alone. Towering above their daughter was the massive form of a wild bear. Michael grabbed his wife's arm, stopping her mad dash forward. "Oh my God," he whispered. They watched, frozen in disbelief, as the bear leaned down and gently nudged their daughter with its nose, as if checking that she was all right. Emma's small hand reached up to touch the bear's muzzle in a gesture so tender, defied understanding. Then, with one final look at the child she had saved, Luna turned and lumbered toward the trees where her cub waited. She paused at the forest's edge, looking back one last time at the burning house, at the child now being swept into her parents' arms, at the approaching flashing lights of fire trucks and ambulances. Sarah and Michael clutched Emma between them, sobbing with relief as they checked her for serious injuries. Through her tears, Emma pointed toward the retreating bear. "She saved me, Mommy," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke. "The bear lady carried me out." The adults exchanged bewildered glances, assuming shock and fear had confused their daughter, but Emma knew what she had experienced. As paramedics wrapped her in a blanket and placed an oxygen mask over her face, she kept her eyes fixed on the spot where Luna had disappeared into the forest. News of the event spread quickly through Pine Creek Valley. Forest rangers investigated the strange story, finding large paw prints inside what remained of the burned house. They discovered bear fur on the remnants of the staircase and Emma's clothing. The impossible had happened. In the weeks that followed, Emma drew picture after picture of her bear. She insisted on keeping a scorched, stuffed rabbit, the one she had been clutching when Luna found her, even though her parents offered to buy her a new one. "The bear lady might not recognize me without it," she explained seriously. Wildlife experts and psychologists came to interview the family. Some suggested that Emma had crawled out herself and imagined the bear in her traumatized state. Others proposed that the bear had entered the house seeking food and accidentally helped the child. Few could accept the simplest explanation, that something profound had occurred that night, something that transcended natural laws and species boundaries. 3 months after the fire, the Harrison family moved into a new home, built farther from the forest's edge. Emma's room faced the woods, at her insistence. Each night, she placed her treasured scorched rabbit on the windowsill. In case she comes to visit, she told her parents. Michael and Sarah exchanged worried glances but said nothing. How could they explain the complexity of wild animals to a child who believed with absolute certainty that one had saved her life? Then came the morning when Emma rushed into the kitchen, her eyes wide with excitement. "She came," she exclaimed. "The bear lady was outside my window." Michael humored his daughter, following her to her bedroom. He expected to find nothing, perhaps a deer or raccoon tracks at most. Instead, he found himself staring at unmistakable bear prints in the soft earth beneath Emma's window, and beside them, smaller prints, a mother and cub. On the windowsill, Emma's scorched rabbit had been moved, turned to face the forest. Park rangers set up cameras near the Harrisons' new home, hoping to identify the bear that seemed drawn to the family. They captured footage of Luna and her growing cub passing near the house every few weeks, always keeping a respectful distance but always following the same path, one that took them past Emma's window. Scientists studied the footage, baffled by behavior that contradicted everything known about wild bears. They developed theories about unusual bonding mechanisms and interspecies recognition patterns. They published papers and held conferences. But Emma understood something the scientists couldn't quantify. On her 7th birthday, sitting on her father's shoulders at the forest edge, watching from a safe distance as Luna and her cub foraged for berries, she whispered, "She remembers me because I remember her." Sarah, overhearing, knelt beside her daughter. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma's answer was simple but profound. The bear lady knew I was somebody's baby, just like her cub. Mommies save babies, that's just what they do. The rangers eventually named the unusual bear pair Luna and Star in their tracking records, but to the locals of Pine Creek Valley, they became known simply as Emma's Angels. Years passed. Emma grew from a curious child into a thoughtful teenager. The story of her rescue became something of a local legend, retold around campfires and in school projects about local wildlife. Some believed it, some didn't. Emma didn't mind either way. She knew the truth. On her 16th birthday, Emma announced her intention to study wildlife biology. No one was surprised. Her bedroom walls were covered with bear photographs and conservation posters. Where other teenagers had posters of celebrities, Emma had maps showing bear migration patterns. Luna was older now, her movements slower, her fur graying around the muzzle. Her cub had grown and left to establish its own territory, as nature intended. But still, every few weeks, the aging bear would make her way past the Harrison home, pausing briefly near Emma's window before continuing on her way. The last time Emma saw Luna was the night before she left for college. Unable to sleep with the excitement and anxiety of her impending departure, she stood at her window, gazing out at the forest she had come to love. A movement caught her eye, the familiar silhouette of a bear, standing at the edge of the trees. Emma stepped outside, ignoring her parents' long-standing rule to never approach the bears. She kept her distance. She wasn't foolish, but close enough to speak softly. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she told Luna, feeling only slightly silly for talking to a bear. "I'm going to learn how to help animals like you. Because of you." Luna watched her with those intelligent dark eyes, the same eyes that had found Emma in a smoke-filled room 11 years earlier. Then, with what seemed like deliberate slowness, the bear raised her head toward the star-filled sky and released a soft, rumbling sound. Not a roar, not a growl, but something uniquely hers. A goodbye. 20 years later, Dr. Emma Harrison stood before an auditorium filled with conservation scientists and wildlife advocates. Behind her, a large screen displayed the title of her groundbreaking research, Cross-Species Empathy, Redefining Our Understanding of Animal Consciousness. The conventional wisdom has always been that animals operate solely on instinct, Emma began, her confidence born from years of fieldwork and research. But my work suggests something more complex is at play. Animals, particularly mammals with complex social structures, demonstrate behaviors that can only be described as empathy, compassion, and even self-sacrifice. She clicked to the next slide, showing a photograph of an aging female bear. "This is Luna, the bear who pulled me from a burning building when I was 5 years old. Conventional science said this was impossible, that I imagined it, that it was coincidence, that wild animals don't risk their lives for human children." Emma smiled, touching the small stuffed rabbit pin on her lapel, a replica of her childhood toy, now too fragile to wear. "Luna taught me that we have only scratched the surface of understanding animal consciousness. My research team has documented hundreds of cases of interspecies intervention. Dolphins supporting drowning humans, elephants protecting injured antelope from predators, primates adopting orphaned animals of different species. These aren't anomalies or coincidences. They represent a fundamental truth we have been too arrogant to see." She paused, looking out at the audience. "Animals know more, feel more, and understand more than we have given them credit for. And it's time we started listening to what they've been trying to tell us." After the standing ovation, after the questions and congratulations, Emma stood alone on the balcony of the conference center. The facility bordered a national forest, one of the reasons she had chosen it for her presentation. In the gathering dusk, she watched the tree line, not really expecting anything but hoping nonetheless. Luna had passed years ago, her remains found and respectfully buried in a quiet ceremony attended by the Harrison family and several park rangers who had monitored the remarkable bear throughout her life. Movement caught Emma's eye, a large shape emerging from the trees. Not Luna, of course, but another bear, watching the human with cautious curiosity. Around its neck was a research collar with a familiar frequency, one of Luna's grandcubs, part of Emma's long-term study. The bear stood watching her for a long moment before turning back toward the forest. As it disappeared among the trees, Emma smiled, knowing with absolute certainty that some connections transcend explanation, that some stories never truly end, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. In that moment, she was 5 years old again, riding to safety on the back of a mother bear who had no reason to save her, except that she did. The international recognition following Dr. Emma Harrison's groundbreaking presentation opened doors previously closed to her research team. Funding poured in, allowing Emma to establish the Luna Wildlife Consciousness Institute in the rolling hills adjacent to Pine Creek Valley. The state-of-the-art facility combined research laboratories with vast natural habitats where animals could be studied without the constraints of traditional captivity. Emma's office overlooked the largest of these habitats, a carefully constructed forest environment where orphaned bear cubs were rehabilitated before being released back into the wild. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows she could see Orion, a 3-month-old black bear cub whose mother had been killed by poachers, playfully climbing a fallen log under the watchful eyes of caregivers. "He's getting stronger every day," said Dr. Marcus Chen, Emma's chief research partner and husband of 7 years. He placed a cup of steaming tea on her desk and rested his hand on her shoulder. The latest brain scan showed increased activity in his emotional processing centers when we played the recordings. Emma nodded, taking a sip of the fragrant tea. The recordings were part of their most controversial research, audio of human children in various emotional states, laughing, crying, calling for help. The bear's neurological responses to these sounds were remarkably similar to their responses to distress calls from bear cubs. "The review board is still hesitant about the wilderness tests," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "They're concerned about liability issues." Emma understood their concerns. The wilderness tests involved creating controlled scenarios in remote locations, situations where carefully monitored animals might encounter humans apparently in distress. The safety protocols were exhaustive, but the ethical questions remained complex. "We have 13 documented cases of spontaneous animal intervention now," Emma said, swiveling her computer screen to show Marcus the latest data. A wolf in Yellowstone that led hikers to an injured child. An elephant in Kenya that shielded a collapsed researcher from the sun for 6 hours until help arrived. A dolphin in Australia that pushed a drowning teenager to shore. She zoomed in on brain scan comparisons. And everyone shows the same neurological signatures we're seeing in our controlled studies. This isn't random, Marcus. This is reproducible science. A knock at the door interrupted them. Emma's assistant, Jade, entered with an expression that immediately caught Emma's attention. "The tracking team just called in," Jade said, her voice tinged with excitement. Sierra made contact again. Emma and Marcus exchanged meaningful glances. Sierra was Luna's great-granddaughter, identified through DNA testing of hair samples collected over the years. The massive female bear had been born wild, but seemed to share her ancestors' unusual interest in the human world, particularly in Emma's research facility. "Where?" Emma asked, already reaching for her coat. "The North Observation Point, about 20 minutes ago. She has 2 cubs with her this time." Within the hour, Emma and Marcus were carefully positioned in a camouflaged observation blind half a mile from where Sierra had been spotted. The specialized structure was designed to block human scent while allowing for close observation and recording. Through high-powered binoculars, Emma watched as the magnificent bear led her cubs through a clearing, pausing occasionally to sniff the air. "She's heading directly toward the facility again," Marcus whispered, making notes on his tablet. "That's the third time this month. It can't be coincidence." Emma adjusted her binoculars, focusing on Sierra's eyes, so much like Luna's had been. Intelligent, aware, purposeful. "She knows we're here," Emma said softly. "She's making a choice to be seen." As if hearing her words, Sierra suddenly stopped and turned her massive head directly toward their blind. The bear rose onto her hind legs, towering nearly 8 feet tall, and stared at their location with unnerving accuracy. Marcus froze. "That's impossible. The blind completely masks our—" "She's not using scent," Emma interrupted, a strange calm settling over her. "She's using something else." For a long moment, bear and humans regarded each other across the distance, separated by space but connected by something less tangible. Then Sierra dropped back to all fours, huffed softly to her cubs, and led them in a deliberate circle around the observation blind before continuing on her way. "Did you get that on camera?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, his scientific skepticism temporarily shaken. "Every second." Back at the facility, they reviewed the footage with their team, analyzing Sierra's behavior from every angle. The debate was heated. Some saw intelligent recognition, others suggested coincidence or simple curiosity about an unfamiliar structure in the woods. That night, alone in their cabin at the edge of the research property, Emma stood on the porch staring into the darkness of the surrounding forest. Marcus joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "What if we're still not asking the right questions?" Emma said, leaning against him. "What if it's not about whether animals can think like humans or feel like humans? What if it's about something more fundamental that connects all living beings? Something we've lost touch with, but they haven't." Marcus remained silent, letting her process her thoughts. "Luna shouldn't have saved me that night," Emma continued. "Every scientific principle says she should have fled from the fire, protected her cub, avoided humans at all costs, but she didn't. She turned to face her husband, her eyes bright with the intensity of revelation. What if consciousness itself isn't exclusively human? What if it's a field we all participate in, humans, bears, every living thing, but experience through different biological filters?" Marcus considered this, his scientist's mind wrestling with implications that stretched beyond conventional parameters. That would mean Luna didn't save me because she thought like a human," Emma finished. "She saved me because, at a fundamental level, the boundaries between her consciousness and mine weren't as solid as we believe. She recognized something in me that resonated with something in her, beyond species, beyond instinct." The magnitude of this idea hung between them in the cool night air. If Emma was right, the implications would reshape not just wildlife biology but humanity's entire understanding of its place in the natural world. A soft, rustling sound from the forest edge drew their attention. They couldn't see anything in the darkness, but both felt a presence, watchful, intelligent, connected. "She's out there," Emma whispered, certain beyond reason. Marcus squeezed her hand. "I know." The publication of Emma's research in the prestigious journal Nature sparked a firestorm in the scientific community. Cross-species empathic recognition, evidence for shared consciousness, became the most downloaded scientific paper of the year, but also the most controversial. Critics were swift and merciless. Dr. Richard Dawkins of Oxford publicly dismissed Emma's work as anthropomorphism masquerading as science. The American Association for Laboratory Animal Science issued a statement warning against emotional projection onto animal subjects. Several of Emma's former professors distanced themselves from her findings, suggesting her childhood experience had biased her methodology. Even Marcus, her staunchest supporter, began to express concerns when the more sensationalist media outlets transformed their research into headlines like "Animals have souls," "Science finally proves it," and "Bear psychic connection confirmed." "This isn't what we claimed," he said, tossing a tabloid onto their kitchen table one morning. The cover showed a badly photoshopped image of a bear with glowing eyes reaching toward a human hand. "They're making us sound like pseudoscientific quacks." Emma sighed, pouring another cup of coffee. The paper was clear about the limitations of our findings. We never used words like soul or psychic. "It doesn't matter," Marcus replied, his frustration evident. "Perception is reality in academia. The Cambridge team is already publishing a rebuttal, and 3 major universities have declined our requests for research collaboration." The pressure mounted when Emma's research grant came up for renewal. The review committee, once enthusiastic about her work, now seemed hesitant, requesting additional verification of her methods and more conservative interpretation of her results. After a particularly difficult meeting with university administrators, Emma found herself sitting alone in her car in the parking garage, fighting back tears of frustration. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Don't forget. Conference call with Tokyo researchers at 4. They still want to collaborate." Emma started the engine but didn't immediately drive away. Instead, she pulled up the photo gallery on her phone, scrolling to the folder she kept hidden from everyone, even Marcus. Inside were the photos and videos that never made it into her official research, the more personal connections with Luna and her descendants over the years. One video in particular always centered her. Taken on her father's phone when Emma was 10, it showed her sitting cross-legged at the edge of their property, reading aloud from a children's book. In the background, partially obscured by foliage but unmistakably present, Luna and her then-adolescent cub listened, their postures relaxed, their attention focused on the small human and her story. The file was time-stamped and geotagged, indisputable evidence of behavior that defied conventional wildlife biology. Yet, Emma had never included it in her research. Some connections were too personal, too profound to subject to scientific dissection. She put her phone away and drove home, her determination renewed. The scientific establishment might question her conclusions, but she knew what she had experienced, what she continued to experience in her work with bears and other mammals. The data supported her, even if the scientific paradigm wasn't ready to shift. At home, she found an unexpected visitor waiting in the driveway, Dr. Elizabeth Woodward, the renowned primatologist whose work with bonobo communication had revolutionized understanding of ape cognition. "Your security is terrible," Elizabeth said by way of greeting, extending her hand. "I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, and no one asked why a stranger was lurking outside your house." Emma smiled despite her exhaustion. She had admired Elizabeth's work for years, but had never met her in person. "Our security is 4-legged and currently tracking you very effectively," she replied, nodding toward the tree line where a research station monitored wildlife movements around their property. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, impressed. "I came because I read your paper. The methodology is sound, the data compelling. But more importantly, it aligns with observations I've been documenting for decades but haven't had the courage to publish." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thumb drive. 30 years of field notes, videos, and data on cases of bonobos, chimpanzees, and gorillas, exhibiting what can only be described as empathy and altruism toward species that are neither kin nor potential mates, behaviors that offer no evolutionary advantage under current theoretical frameworks. Emma stared at the small device, understanding its significance. "Why are you sharing this with me? My reputation is already established," Elizabeth interrupted. "I can afford to be controversial at this stage of my career. More importantly, I'm 76 years old, and I'd like to see this paradigm shift before I die." She pressed the thumb drive into Emma's hand. "You're not alone in this, Doctor Harrison. There are more of us than you realize. Scientists who have seen things in the field that don't fit neatly into current theories of animal behavior." That night, Emma and Marcus stayed up until dawn reviewing Elizabeth's files. The evidence was compelling. Hundreds of documented cases of great apes intervening to help other species, including humans, in distress. One particularly striking video showed a female gorilla rescuing a child who had fallen into her zoo enclosure, protecting the unconscious boy from other gorillas, and gently carrying him to where zookeepers could retrieve him. "This changes everything," Marcus whispered as the sun began to rise. With Elizabeth's support and this additional data, Emma nodded, a new strategy forming in her mind. "We need to bring these researchers together. Everyone who's been documenting these anomalies in isolation. A conference, invitation only, focused specifically on cross-species empathy and consciousness." 6 months later, the first International Symposium on Cross-Species Consciousness convened at Emma's research facility. 42 researchers from 17 countries presented evidence of animals exhibiting behaviors that defied conventional explanations. Elephants mourning human caretakers, dolphins repeatedly saving swimmers from shark attacks, a lioness adopting orphaned antelope calves in the wild. The scientific establishment largely dismissed the gathering as fringe research, but Emma didn't care. For the first time, she was surrounded by peers who understood, who had seen the same inexplicable connections between species that she had experienced with Luna. On the final evening of the conference, Emma led the group to a special observation area overlooking a tranquil meadow at the edge of the research property. As the sun began to set, Sierra emerged from the trees with her cubs, now nearly a year old and much more independent. The massive bear paused at the edge of the meadow, looking directly at the gathered researchers. "She's been coming at sunset every day of the conference," Emma explained softly. "Always at the same time, always taking the same path through the meadow. She's never approached the building or shown any aggression." The scientists watched in awed silence as Sierra methodically moved around the perimeter of the meadow, close enough to be clearly visible but maintaining a respectful distance. When she reached the far side, she rose onto her hind legs, facing the observation area with unmistakable awareness of their presence. Dr. Woodward gasped softly. "She's showing herself deliberately," she whispered. "This is display behavior, intentional communication." Sierra remained upright for several seconds before dropping back to all fours and disappearing into the forest with her cubs. The gathered researchers erupted into excited discussion, their professional skepticism temporarily overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. Later that night, when the others had retired to their rooms, Emma returned to the observation deck alone. The meadow was bathed in moonlight, peaceful and still. She had no expectation of seeing Sierra again. The bear had already made her appearance for the day. Yet, as she stood there, breathing in the cool night air, a familiar silhouette emerged from the trees. Sierra, alone, this time without her cubs, walked slowly to the center of the moonlit meadow and sat, her massive form perfectly illuminated, her gaze fixed on Emma's position. For nearly 10 minutes they remained this way, human and bear, observer and observed, researcher and subject, though Emma knew these distinctions were dissolving with each encounter. Something profound was happening between them, something beyond her scientific training to fully articulate. Finally, Sierra rose and returned to the forest. But before disappearing completely into the shadows, she paused and looked back one final time. A gesture so reminiscent of Luna's farewell 20 years earlier that Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. In that moment, she understood with absolute clarity that her life's work had never really been about proving animal consciousness to the scientific establishment. It had been about honoring a debt to a bear who had seen past the boundaries of species to recognize a child in danger, and who had passed that recognition down through generations of her descendants. The science would follow eventually. The data would accumulate until it could no longer be dismissed. But the truth had already been revealed to Emma long ago, in the smoke-filled bedroom of a burning house, when a mother bear had made a choice that no theory of natural selection could explain. The morning after the conference concluded, Emma was awakened by an urgent call from the facility's security team. During the night, someone had broken into the research building and accessed the main computer servers. The surveillance cameras had been disabled with surprising expertise, and the intruders had left almost no trace of their presence. "What did they take?" Emma asked, rushing through the main laboratory with Marcus and the head of security. "That's the strange part," replied Diane Foster, their head of cybersecurity. "They copied research data, but they didn't take anything physically. No equipment, no samples, nothing tangible." "Which data specifically?" Marcus asked, his concern evident. Diane pulled up a log on her tablet. "Everything related to the neural mapping studies, particularly the comparative brain scan showing emotional response patterns across species. They also downloaded all the tracking data for Sierra and the other monitored bears." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Someone wanted her research badly enough to commit felony breaking and entering, but why? The answer came 3 days later, when Emma received a call from an unlisted number. The man on the line identified himself only as Dr. Reynolds, claiming to represent a private research foundation with interests aligned with Emma's work. "We apologize for the unorthodox method of acquiring your data," the voice said, smooth and unapologetic. "But after your organization declined our official requests for collaboration, we were forced to pursue alternative approaches." "You committed a crime," Emma replied coldly. "I've already filed a police report." "A report that will go nowhere," Reynolds countered. "But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because what you've discovered has implications far beyond wildlife conservation or academic debates about animal consciousness." Despite her anger, Emma found herself intrigued. "What implications?" "Your neural mapping work shows that consciousness operates on a substrate that transcends species boundaries, that recognition, empathy, and connection can occur between completely different biological systems. Do you understand what that means for the future of artificial intelligence? For the possibility of communication with non-human intelligence, whether terrestrial or otherwise?" Emma realized with growing unease where this was heading. "You're with the military research division that approached us last year, the one developing autonomous combat systems." "Our interests are more diverse than that," Reynolds replied, neither confirming nor denying. "But yes, understanding how consciousness operates across biological boundaries has significant defense applications. If machines could be developed with the capacity for cross-species empathic recognition that your bear demonstrated—" "Luna didn't save me because of some generalizable neural algorithm," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp. This isn't something you can code into a weapon system. Perhaps not yet, Reynolds conceded. But your research suggests pathways we hadn't considered. We'd like you to join our team as a consultant. The compensation would be substantial, enough to fund your wildlife research for decades without the constant struggle for grants and academic approval. The offer was tempting in its way. Emma thought of all the good she could do with unlimited research funding. The conservation projects she could support, the habitats she could help protect, but the cost was too high. "I'm not interested in helping create empathic killing machines," she said firmly, "and if you approach me or my facility again, I'll go public with everything I know about your organization and its methods." Reynolds sighed. "That would be unfortunate for all concerned, Doctor." Harrison, "Your research truly is groundbreaking. Think about our offer. The door remains open." The line went dead, leaving Emma with a deep sense of foreboding. She had anticipated skepticism from her scientific peers, even ridicule. She hadn't anticipated that her work might have applications beyond her field, applications that could be weaponized. That evening, Emma called an emergency meeting with her core research team. She explained the situation without hiding her concerns, then looked around at the faces of people who had dedicated their careers to understanding and protecting wildlife. "We need to make a decision," she said. "We can continue publishing openly and risk having our work co-opted for purposes we never intended. Or we can become more selective about what we publish and who has access to our complete findings." The debate was intense. Some team members argued that scientific knowledge belonged to humanity and should never be withheld. Others pointed out that the history of science was filled with discoveries that had been weaponized against their discoverers' wishes. "There's a third option," said Dr. Nadia Patel, their neurobiologist. "We focus our research specifically on the aspects of cross-species consciousness that promote empathy, cooperation, and mutual recognition, but deliberately avoid the neural mapping techniques that could be adapted for machine learning or AI development." "Self-censorship," Marcus said, frowning. "Ethical boundaries," Nadia corrected. "Every scientific field has them." The discussion continued late into the night, but by morning, a consensus had emerged. The Luna Institute would continue its research into cross-species consciousness, but would shift its focus toward applications in conservation, habitat protection, and improved human-wildlife coexistence. The neural mapping studies would be suspended indefinitely. It was a difficult decision for Emma, who believed deeply in the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. But when she walked through the rehabilitation area later that day, watching Orion and the other rescued cubs exploring their environment with curiosity and increasing confidence, she knew it was the right choice. Some knowledge came with too great a responsibility to be shared indiscriminately. Luna had taught her that consciousness created connection, and connection created obligation. She would honor that obligation, even if it meant limiting the scope of her scientific ambitions. What she didn't yet realize was that elsewhere in the world, others had already begun pursuing the applications that she had rejected, with consequences that would eventually bring her face to face with the darkest implications of her research. 2 years passed. The Luna Institute flourished, focusing on practical applications of Emma's research to wildlife conservation and human-animal conflict resolution. Their innovative techniques for redirecting predator behavior away from human settlements had reduced bear-human conflicts in the region by nearly 70%. The neural monitoring program for rehabilitated cubs showed promising results in preparing them for successful reintroduction to the wild. Sierra and her cubs became regular visitors to the meadow observation area, sometimes accompanied by other bears, a development that both thrilled and puzzled the research team. It was as if knowledge of the safe observation zone was being communicated through the local bear population. Emma's academic reputation began to recover as her more practical work gained recognition. While the theoretical aspects of her research on shared consciousness remained controversial, her successes in applied conservation were undeniable. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, Emma received an urgent call from Dr. Elizabeth Woodward. The elderly primatologist's voice was tight with concern. "Have you seen the announcement from GenCore Biosystems?" she asked without preamble. Emma hadn't. She'd been in the field since dawn, monitoring Sierra's newest cubs as they learned to fish in the facility's rehabilitation stream. They're announcing a breakthrough in cross-species neural interface technology next week, Elizabeth continued. The press release mentions building on recent discoveries in wildlife neurobiology to create the first functional communication bridge between human and non-human consciousness. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. GenCore. They're the biotech division of the same military contractor that broke into your facility 2 years ago, Elizabeth confirmed grimly. They've been very quiet about their research until now, but this announcement suggests they've succeeded where you deliberately stopped. The implications were chilling. Emma had suspended her neural mapping research specifically to prevent this kind of application. If GenCore had developed technology based on her stolen data that could interface directly with animal consciousness. "We need to see what they've actually developed," Emma said, her mind racing. The press release could be exaggerated. "I've already thought of that," Elizabeth replied. "The announcement is being made at the International Tech Summit in San Francisco next week. I've arranged press credentials for you through my foundation. You can attend the demonstration anonymously." 6 days later, Emma sat in the back row of a packed auditorium at the Moscone Center, her press badge identifying her as a representative of the Woodward Wildlife Foundation. On stage, Dr. James Reynolds, the same man who had called her 2 years earlier, was making a slick presentation about the revolutionary potential of GenCore's new technology. "For centuries, humans have wondered what animals are thinking," Reynolds told the enthusiastic crowd. "Today, we're taking the first step toward actually finding out." A video began playing on the massive screen behind him, showing a laboratory setting where a chimpanzee sat calmly wearing what appeared to be a specialized headset. A researcher wearing a similar device sat across from the chimp. "What we're witnessing is the world's first direct neural communication between human and non-human primate," Reynolds narrated as the video continued. "Our proprietary technology translates neural patterns across species, allowing for basic but meaningful exchange of emotional states and simple concepts." In the video, the chimp made a series of gestures, and text appeared on a monitor. "Fruit, want, now." The researcher nodded and reached for a banana. The chimp took it and made another gesture. New text appeared. "Good, human friend." The audience erupted in applause. Emma remained motionless, her heart pounding. The technology was crude, essentially a more advanced version of existing systems that translated neural activity into text. But the implications were exactly what she had feared. Direct manipulation of communication pathways between species. Reynolds continued, his voice smooth with practiced conviction. Initial applications include improved wildlife management, reducing human-animal conflicts, and enhanced training techniques. But the long-term potential is virtually limitless. Imagine communicating directly with endangered species to better understand their needs. Imagine working collaboratively with highly intelligent animals like dolphins or elephants. He paused for effect. Or imagine military and law enforcement applications. Communication with tactical animals that can access areas humans cannot. performing reconnaissance or search and rescue with unprecedented coordination. Emma had heard enough. This was precisely the weaponization of cross-species communication she had feared. She slipped out of the auditorium and found a quiet corner to call Marcus. "It's worse than we thought," she told him. "They're marketing it as a communication device, but the military applications are front and center. They're already calling it a breakthrough, but I can see the flaws from here. They're forcing simplified human language patterns onto non-human neural structures." "Can you challenge them?" Marcus asked. "Publicly question their methods?" Emma considered this. "Not without revealing my identity and potentially facing legal action for the very public accusation that they stole our research. And their technology is just close enough to working that most people won't understand the profound ethical issues." She rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The worst part is that they're right about the basic concept. Cross-species communication is possible. I've experienced it firsthand with Luna and Sierra, but it doesn't work through imposed language structures and neural interfaces. It works through genuine connection, through recognition of shared experiences and emotions. As she ended the call, Emma noticed a man watching her from nearby, one of Reynolds' assistants from the presentation. Before she could move away, he approached her. "Dr. Harrison," he said quietly. "Doctor, Reynolds would like to speak with you privately." Emma considered refusing, then realized this might be her only chance to understand exactly what GenCore had developed, and perhaps find a way to counter it. Reynolds was waiting in a small conference room off the main exhibition hall. He smiled when she entered, gesturing to a chair across from him. "I'm glad you could attend our presentation," he said. "Though I admit, I'm surprised you used an alias." "I'm not here to collaborate," Emma replied coldly. "I'm here to understand what you've done with my stolen research." Reynolds shrugged, unapologetic. "We pursued a direction you chose to abandon. The results speak for themselves." "Do they?" Emma challenged. "I saw a chimpanzee trained to produce signals that your system translates into simplistic text. That's not cross-species communication. It's a fancy version of techniques animal researchers have been using for decades." "It's merely the public demonstration version," Reynolds replied. "The classified systems are considerably more advanced. But that's not really why I wanted to speak with you." He leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "We've encountered anomalies in our field tests that align with your more theoretical work on shared consciousness fields. Effects we can't explain through conventional neurobiology." Despite herself, Emma was intrigued. "What kind of anomalies?" "Subjects influencing each other without the interface technology active. Long-distance effects that shouldn't be possible. And most interestingly, specific animals seeking out our research facilities, approaching our testing areas instead of avoiding them." Emma felt a chill run through her. The behavior he was describing sounded eerily similar to Sierra's regular appearances at their observation meadow. "We believe you've discovered something far more significant than even you realize," Reynolds continued. "Not just cross-species empathy, but a fundamental property of consciousness itself, one that operates independently of our current understanding of physical limitations. We want you to help us understand it." Emma studied him carefully. "Why would I help you weaponize that understanding?" "Because if you don't help us understand it properly, we'll continue developing applications based on incomplete understanding, with potentially unforeseen consequences." His eyes met hers directly. "You've experienced something profound with these bears, Dr. Harrison. Something that changed the course of your life. Don't you want to understand what really happened that night?" The question struck at the heart of Emma's decades-long quest. Despite all her research, despite all she had learned about animal cognition and behavior, the fundamental mystery remained: why had Luna saved her? What connection had formed between them that defied natural law and scientific explanation? For a brief moment, Emma was tempted by Reynolds' offer: access to resources and technology that might finally answer the question that had defined her life. Then she remembered the chimpanzee in the video, fitted with invasive technology designed to force its consciousness into human-readable patterns. She thought of Sierra and her cubs, approaching the observation meadow of their own volition, communicating in their own way on their own terms. "I already understand what happened," Emma said, rising from her chair. "Luna recognized something in me that transcended the boundaries between our species, something your technology will never capture because you're trying to control the connection rather than honor it." Reynolds' expression hardened. "That's a romantic notion, Dr. Harrison. But we're developing this technology with or without your input. The only question is whether it will be informed by your full understanding." "There are some things technology can't interface with," Emma replied. "Some connections that have to be formed through mutual recognition and respect. Luna taught me that, and I won't help you turn that lesson into a weapon." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Doctor." "Reynolds, the bears you're trying to study with your technology, they're smarter than you think. And they remember." Emma left the conference and flew home that evening, her mind troubled by the implications of GenCore's technology. If they succeeded in developing even a crude form of neural interface with wild animals, the potential for exploitation was enormous. Yet she had no legal recourse to stop them, not without revealing that she had insider knowledge of their classified research. When she returned to the Luna Institute, she found Marcus and their team waiting anxiously for her report. She described what she had seen and her conversation with Reynolds, holding nothing back. "So, what do we do now?" Dr. Patel asked when Emma had finished. Emma took a deep breath, coming to a decision that had been forming since her confrontation with Reynolds. "We change our approach. Instead of hiding our research on consciousness fields to prevent misuse, we publish everything. All our data, all our findings, all our theories. We make it open-source knowledge that belongs to everyone, not proprietary technology that can be weaponized by one corporation or government." The team looked at her in surprise. It was a complete reversal of their previous strategy. "If we publish everything," Marcus said slowly, "we can establish the ethical framework for its use at the same time, create a scientific consensus around responsible applications before the technology is fully developed." "Exactly," Emma nodded. "GenCore is operating in secrecy, developing applications without ethical oversight. By bringing everything into the open, we force the conversation about how this knowledge should be used, and we provide alternatives to their approach." Over the following months, the Luna Institute published a comprehensive series of papers detailing their research into cross-species consciousness, including the neural mapping studies they had previously withheld. The publications created a sensation in the scientific community, igniting intense debate about the nature of consciousness and the ethical implications of technologies designed to bridge species boundaries. GenCore attempted to discredit Emma's research, but the meticulous documentation and reproducible results spoke for themselves. Other research institutions began replicating her findings, confirming the existence of consciousness fields that operated beyond conventional neural networks. 6 months after her confrontation with Reynolds, Emma received an unexpected visitor at the Institute. Dr. Sophia Chen, the lead neurobiologist from GenCore's research team. "I resigned last week, Doctor," Chen told Emma without preamble. "After reading your papers, I couldn't continue with the direction our research was taking." She handed Emma a thumb drive. This contains documentation of animal welfare violations in GenCore's testing facilities, along with evidence that they deliberately used your stolen research data. I've already sent copies to the appropriate authorities, but I thought you should have this as well. The evidence provided by Dr. Chen led to a federal investigation of GenCore's research practices, and eventually to the suspension of their neural interface program pending a complete ethical review. Reynolds was removed from his position, though the company itself continued operating with modified research protocols. More importantly, the controversy sparked a global conversation about the ethics of human-animal communication technologies. New international guidelines were developed requiring that any such technologies be non-invasive, prioritize animal welfare, and respect the natural communication patterns of each species rather than imposing human linguistic structures. For Emma, the vindication was bittersweet. While she had succeeded in preventing the worst abuses of her research, she had also been forced to confront how profound her discoveries truly were, and how unprepared human society might be for their implications. That understanding deepened on a snowy winter morning when Emma arrived at the Institute to find an unusual gathering in the observation meadow. Sierra was there with her cubs, as she often was. But this time, she was accompanied by 7 other adult bears, including 2 black bears that weren't even from the same species. The bears moved together in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern, pausing at specific points around the meadow before gathering in its center, directly in view of the observation area where Emma stood watching. "What are they doing?" Marcus whispered, having joined her at the window. Emma shook her head slowly, unable to articulate the intuition forming in her mind. The bears appeared to be communicating, not just with each other but with her. As she watched, Sierra rose onto her hind legs and looked directly at Emma, maintaining eye contact with an intensity that transcended species boundaries. In that moment, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced since the night of the fire, a direct connection, a recognition that flowed both ways. Not words, not language, but something more fundamental. Awareness meeting. Awareness across the divide of different biological forms. "They know," Emma whispered, understanding washing over her like a wave. "They know what GenCore was trying to do. They know we stopped it." Marcus looked at her uncertainly. "Emma, that's—" "I know how it sounds," she interrupted. "But look at them, Marcus. This isn't random. They're acknowledging us." 10 years passed. Emma's hair had begun to show strands of silver, and the Luna Institute had grown into a globally respected research center with satellite facilities on 3 continents. Their non-invasive approaches to wildlife communication and conflict resolution had become the gold standard, transforming humanity's relationship with the natural world in subtle but profound ways. The winter morning found Emma sitting alone on the observation deck, wrapped in a thick blanket against the cold. Sierra was old now, her once glossy coat graying around the muzzle, her movements slower but still powerful. The bond between them had deepened over the years, transcending the barriers of species in ways that continued to defy scientific explanation. Today was different. Emma had known it from the moment she awoke, feeling a gentle but insistent pull toward the observation deck, a sensation she had learned to recognize over the decades since Luna first carried her from the burning house. Sierra emerged from the trees alone, moving with deliberate purpose toward the center of the snow-covered meadow. The massive bear paused, looking directly at Emma with those intelligent eyes that held generations of wisdom. And Emma understood. She descended from the deck, ignoring the strict safety protocols she herself had established, and walked slowly into the meadow. Behind her, she heard the alarmed voice of a research assistant calling her name, but she raised a hand to signal that everything was all right. Sierra watched her approach, motionless except for the cloud of her breath in the winter air, When Emma stood just 10 feet away, the bear lowered herself to the ground in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial. "Thank you," Emma said softly, her voice carrying in the still morning air, "for everything you and your family have taught us." Sierra blinked slowly, a gesture Emma had come to recognize as acknowledgement. Then the bear rose again, turning toward the forest with a final glance back at Emma that echoed Luna's farewell from decades ago. They both knew this was the last time they would meet. Sierra was reaching the end of her natural lifespan, and something in her posture, in the deliberate nature of this encounter, told Emma she had come to say goodbye. Emma watched as Sierra disappeared into the trees, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. The cycle that had begun with Luna's impossible decision to save a human child was coming to its natural conclusion, not with scientific papers or technological breakthroughs, but with this simple, profound exchange between two beings who had recognized something essential in each other. 3 weeks later, Sierra's tracking collar sent a final signal from deep within the most remote region of the forest. When the research team reached the location, they found her lying peacefully beneath an ancient pine tree, her body already being reclaimed by the wilderness she had inhabited with such dignity. Emma insisted on traveling to the site herself, despite the difficult terrain. Standing beside Sierra's massive form, she knelt and placed a hand on the bear's thick fur one last time. "We found her like this," the tracking team leader said quietly. "She chose this place deliberately. It's sheltered, peaceful." Emma nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. As she rose to leave, she noticed something beside Sierra's body, a small, weather-worn object half buried in the forest floor. Brushing away the pine needles, Emma uncovered a scorched, barely recognizable remnant of cloth and stuffing. Her rabbit. The toy she had clutched during the fire. The one she had placed on her windowsill as a child. The one that had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Somehow, impossibly, Luna had found it, perhaps near the ruins of the original cabin, and the precious object had been passed down through generations of her family, a token of the connection between their lives. Emma held the tattered remnant to her chest, understanding at last the true nature of the bond that had defined her life's work. It had never been about neural pathways or consciousness fields or evolutionary anomalies. It had been about recognition. One living being seeing another across the seemingly uncrossable boundaries of species and choosing connection over separation, compassion over indifference. On a bright spring morning 5 years later, Dr. Emma Harrison stood before a gathering of researchers, conservationists, and government officials for the dedication of the Sierra Wildlife Corridor, a protected passageway of wilderness connecting 5 national parks and ensuring the safe migration of countless species for generations to come. At 70 years old, Emma's once dark hair had turned completely silver, but her eyes remained as sharp and perceptive as ever. She had retired from active research the previous year, passing leadership of the Luna Institute to her protege, Dr. Layla Dage, a brilliant young wildlife biologist whose own life had been saved by an elephant matriarch during a flash flood in Kenya. "We gathered today not just to dedicate a conservation project," Emma began, her voice strong despite her years. "We gathered to acknowledge a simple truth that took humanity too long to recognize. We are not separate from the natural world. We are part of it. One voice in a vast conversation that has been ongoing since life first emerged on this planet." She gestured to the majestic forest stretching behind her. "For most of human history, we believed ourselves to be alone in our consciousness, the only species capable of complex thought, emotion, and connection. We now know that was our blindness, not the truth of the world." Emma touched the small pendant hanging around her neck, a glass case containing a tiny scrap of the scorched rabbit, preserved as a reminder of where everything had begun. 45 years ago, a mother bear made a choice that defied every scientific expectation. She entered a burning building to save a human child who should have meant nothing to her. That choice set in motion a journey of discovery that has transformed our understanding of consciousness itself. She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. We have learned that consciousness does not belong solely to humans, or even to what we call higher mammals. It flows through all living things, connecting us in ways we are only beginning to understand. The boundaries we perceived were illusions born of our limited perspective. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. A mix of scientists who had built careers on Emma's discoveries and skeptics who still questioned her more profound conclusions about the nature of consciousness. Some of you still doubt, Emma acknowledged with a gentle smile. That's good. Doubt is the engine of science. But I ask you to consider this. In the decades since we began studying cross-species consciousness, documented cases of animals acting to save humans from danger have increased 1,000-fold. Dolphins guiding stranded swimmers to shore. Elephants shielding humans from charging predators. Domestic cats waking families during house fires. She swept her hand toward the forest again. It's not that these behaviors didn't occur before. It's that we weren't paying attention. We explained them away as coincidence or anthropomorphism because they didn't fit our understanding of how the world should work. Emma's voice softened. Luna taught me to pay attention, and once I began truly seeing, I discovered that the world is far more connected, far more conscious, far more alive with recognition than we ever imagined. As she concluded her speech and the audience rose in applause, Emma noticed movement at the forest edge. A young female bear, Sierra's granddaughter, Echo, had emerged from the trees with her 2 cubs. The bear paused as if listening to Emma's words, then gently guided her cubs back into the protection of the forest. Few in the audience noticed this brief appearance, but Emma saw it for what it was. A continuation of the conversation that had begun in a burning cabin decades ago. A reminder that some connections transcend explanation, existing in the space between established science and yet to be discovered truth. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Emma sat alone on the porch of her small cabin near the Institute grounds. The scorched rabbit pendant rested in her palm, a tangible link to the moment that had defined her life. From the nearby forest came the distant sound of a bear calling to its cubs, a low, huffing sound that carried on the evening breeze. Emma closed her eyes, listening not just with her ears but with something deeper, something that Luna had awakened in her all those years ago. And in that moment of perfect stillness, the boundaries between human consciousness and the vast, interconnected awareness of the natural world seemed to dissolve completely. Emma felt what she had glimpsed as a child in Luna's eyes, what she had spent a lifetime trying to articulate in scientific papers and research grants and conservation policies. We are not alone in our awareness. We never were. The true miracle wasn't that a bear had saved a human child from a fire. The true miracle was that we are all part of the same vast tapestry of consciousness. Different threads, different colors, but woven together into a single, magnificent whole. Emma opened her eyes, tucking the pendant back beneath her shirt, close to her heart. The sun had set, but the forest remained alive with sounds, each one a voice in the ancient conversation of which humanity was just beginning to recognize itself as a part. "Thank you," she whispered to the gathering darkness. To the memory of a mother bear who had seen past the boundaries of species to recognize a child in need. to the generations of bears who had continued that recognition in their own way. In the distance, a bear called again, the sound echoing through the valley like an answer across time and space, across the artificial boundaries between species, between past and present, between what we know and what we have yet to discover. And in that wild voice, Emma heard the truth she had spent a lifetime learning. In a world of countless differences, it is recognition that binds us. In a universe of separation, it is connection that saves us. In the face of indifference, it is compassion that makes us truly alive. The conversation continues. We need only learn to listen. At normal bear behavior. This is